everyone, welcome back to Cars and Zebras. Today I have another featured drag race, so I sure hope that you enjoy it. If you find the video entertaining, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel because I do post these videos regularly, and also make sure to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. I do appreciate you watching, so without further ado, let's get to our featured drag race. Our first featured car is a 1968 Pontiac Firebird, but not just any Firebird. This is a 400 HO. Now the base model 400 was also a great car, 330 horsepower, 430 pound-feet of torque. But with that HO you got just a little bit more horsepower, 5 more to be exact, 335 horsepower at 5,000 RPM, and the same thunderous 430 pound-feet of torque at 3,300 RPM. It had 10.75 to 1 compression, and the HO was essentially sandwiched between the base model 400 and the 400 Ram Air. And really I say in the middle, but that Ram Air was kind of a league of its own. I mean, hotter cam, stronger valve springs, of course the functional hood scoops, but that is a video in itself that I will do in the future. But the 400 HO was a fantastic option, and actually all 400s had a 4-barrel carburetor, that being the Rochester Quadrajet. Interestingly, on all of those 4-barrel carburetors, they had throttle restrictors, which stopped the secondaries from opening more than 90%. Now, Pontiac people, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I had heard they did that so it would slightly decrease the horsepower, allowing the GTO to still have the highest rating on the lot. But of course, any Pontiac enthusiast will tell you that the throttle restrictors were easily modified, and you could then access the remaining 10% of those absolutely succulent secondaries on the Rochester Quadrajet.
That's really loud.
Yeah, thanks. Took the restrictor plate off, give the Red Dragon a little more juice. But let's keep that on the down low. It's not exactly street legal. Hey, Mike.
There were a few different transmission options available. The first was a 3-speed manual, and oddly enough, that was a Dearborn 3-speed sourced from Ford. They also had the 4-speed manual and even the close ratio option, and then there was the automatic, that being the tried and true TH400. This car features the 4-speed manual, though I'm not sure if it's a close ratio 4-speed or not. To absolutely obliterate those rear tires, there were many rear gear options available in 1968. You could go as low as a 256 gear. Our featured car has 373 gears. 390 was required in the Ram Air, but in 1968, you could go as high as a 433 gear. Starting in 1968, for all gears that were 336 and deeper, Pontiac actually introduced a heavy-duty 4-pinion differential versus the previous 2-pinion. So that differential was a little bit more sturdy being a 4-pinion, but there were still some problems with the limited slip. Like everybody else in the 1960s, Pontiac tried to come up with a cool name for their limited slip differential, and what they came up with was Safety Track. Now, the Safety Track limited slip was known for being adequate in street applications, but in applications on the drag strip with slicks, it was a little bit weak. So for this car, not a big deal. It's running street tires. But if you've got one of these and you want to run slicks on the drag strip, you probably should upgrade before you break it. Curb weight for the 1968 Pontiac Firebird 400 with the manual trans was about 3,400 pounds, so it was just a little chunky, not too bad.
I'm not fat, I'm big boned.
The price of a 1968 Pontiac Firebird was actually very reasonable. The base model was around $2,700, but if you wanted the 400 package, that was going to be another $351. And that would bring your total price to a fantastic $3,132. That was a steal at the time. Adjusting for inflation, that would be about $23,000 today. And this price looks even better when you compare it to that of the Ram Air package. To get the Ram Air, that was another $600 on top of the $351 that you already paid for the 400 package. So that came in at $3,732, which adjusting for inflation was about $27,500. 500 bucks. So at the time, I would have to say that the 400 HO was probably the car to go with, as far as bang for the buck is concerned. Production on the 1968 Firebird was fantastic. The 400, including the base model, the HO, and the Ram Air, sold almost 38,000 units. Original statistics state that the car could run 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, and the quarter mile in 14.2 seconds. Now remember, you guys, I know that seems somewhat slow, but the tires weren't as good then, and don't forget, they were testing it with the throttle restrictors still in place. So I'm sure that our car today is going to run just a little bit quicker than that. It was rated 10 miles per gallon. Prices today are somewhat varied. You can find a base model 400 usually in the high $20,000 range. But if you're looking for the HO and a really clean model, expect at least $30,000 to $40,000 range. And the Ram Air, you know what, just a lot more. Expect a lot more than that. I did dig up a few interesting facts about the 1968 Firebird, but I'm going to save the best one for last, so hang in there. To start, and I found this really interesting, was that for the 1967 and early 1968 Pontiac Firebirds, the VIN or cowl tags cannot identify which V8 was originally in the car. I just think that's kind of interesting. Another cool fact was that you could get front disc brakes on the 68 Firebird, and they cost $63. However, just like the Camaro of that year, they were very troublesome and very expensive to fix. Another super cool option was that you could actually get adjustable Coney shocks for $42. How awesome is that? Now, I told you guys I was going to save the best fact for last, and here it is. In 1968, Car and Driver magazine did some testing on the 400 HO, the 390 Javelin, the 390 Mustang, the 390 Cougar, the Camaro SS 396, and the 340 Barracuda. And overall, they found that the 400 HO was the quickest car, it was the smoothest car, and they actually said, quote, the Firebird was almost in a class by itself. How cool is that? That is some high praise.
That's high praise!
But enough talk about the 1968 Pontiac Firebird 400 HO. Let's get to its competitor. This is a 1963 Studebaker Avanti. And before I jump into this, you guys, let me just go off on a little bit of a tangent first. I do need to premise all this by saying I really didn't know very much about the Avanti prior to the research for this video. But after learning as much as I did, I have to say that honestly, I have never been so impressed with a car in my life. This car was just so ahead of the game. The technology, the safety features, the style. It's just absolutely awesome. I just wish that the car would have caught on a little bit more and Studebaker could have survived, because I think they had a lot to offer. And now I'm starting to understand why the Studebaker crowd is so dedicated to their cars. I've owned a lot of classic cars, but I'm gonna say now that either an Avanti or maybe a Lark R2, it's moving to the top of the list, you guys. I'm gonna have to own one of these in the next few years. Alright, so this has been a Cars and Zebras tangent, and I'm done. Let's actually move on to the video. This is a 1963 Studebaker Avanti. And there were a few engine options that year. You had the R1, which was a naturally aspirated 289 cubic inch V8, 240 horsepower, 280 pound-feet of torque. They say that that was probably underrated, more like 305 pound-feet of torque, so not that bad. But this isn't just an R1. This car is an R2. It features the same sized 289 cubic inch engine. However, it makes 289 horsepower at 5,200 RPM and 303 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM. And so you're probably asking yourself, how does it do that? It's the same size engine, but it's making quite a bit more horsepower. Oh, my friends, from the factory, it features forced induction. That is no joke. Specifically, it has a Paxton SN60 supercharger that's belt-driven, putting out 4.5 pounds of boost in an engine that has a compression ratio of 9:1. Of course, I do have to admit that the R2 wasn't even the top dog. You could get the R3 in the Avanti, And the R3 is an absolute monster.
Engine, which is 304 and a half. I'll tell it. Livonia, Michigan. As the Chevy Camaro 1969. You win.
You okay, Donnie?
My pants are tight!
But the R3 was pretty rare. There were only about 9 of those in Avantis that year. And the R3 is so cool that it will be a video in itself. But how about we get back to our absolutely gorgeous featured car, our 63 Avanti R2. And more specifically, let's talk about transmissions that year. There were a few different options. You could get a 3-speed manual, a 4-speed manual, and a 3-speed automatic. All of those being supplied by Borg Warner. Our car has the 3-speed automatic. What I found to be very interesting about the automatic transmission is that it usually starts in second gear, giving you a single upshift during regular acceleration. But if you wanted to use first gear, you had to shift it into first manually, or at a slow speed, completely just put the hammer down and it would do it for you. I'm guessing our driver will be using first gear. There were a few different rear gear ratios available that year. The standard in the 3-speed automatic was a 331. The 4-speed came with a 373. Our car, even though it's an automatic, is featuring the 373 gear, so it's going to be just a little bit quicker than stock. Now, actually, and I couldn't believe this when I found it, so if this is wrong, Studebaker fans, you gotta correct me. But I found that in 1964, you could option all the way up to a 538 gear. That is absolutely insane. Now, all of those gears were housed in a Dana 44 rear end, so very robust. If you're not already a fan of the Studebaker Avanti, you might not realize, but these actually have fiberglass bodies, and that helped save a ton of weight. And remember, these cars were very overbuilt. The frames were extremely sturdy, and they had a ton of safety features. And even with all of that, because of the fiberglass body, curb weight was only 3,100 pounds. That's crazy. If you wanted all of that advanced technology and futuristic design, well, you were definitely gonna pay for it. These cars were not cheap. In 1963, the starting price of a Studebaker Avanti was $4,445. And remember, this car features the R2 engine. That's another $210, bringing the total to $4,655. That makes this car one of the most expensive I have reviewed on this channel. Adjusting for inflation, that would be about $39,000 today. And you might say to yourself, well, hey, that doesn't sound like that much money, but remember, our 1968 Pontiac Firebird 400, when adjusting for inflation, comes in at only $23,000. So the Studebaker, as cool as it is, it's pretty expensive. Original testing of an R2 equipped Avanti stated that it could achieve almost 160 miles per hour in the measured mile. And at the time, Motor Trend reported a 0 to 60 of 8 seconds and a quarter mile in 15.8 seconds at 91 miles per hour. And I don't know about you guys, but those numbers seem just a little bit slow to me, especially when you think about the power to weight ratio of this car. I wonder if perhaps they were actually testing an R1 and they listed it as an R2. Regardless, I'm sure that our featured car is going to run just a little bit quicker than that. Production numbers for the 1963 Avanti weren't terrible considering its cost. The R1 sold around 2,282 units, the R2 1,552 units, and the R3 came in at 9 units. Prices for these cars are starting to go a little bit crazy because they are getting harder to find. In a private sale, you might find an R2 for $30,000 to $35,000, but usually they're in the $40,000 to $50,000 range. And are you looking at buying one of those R3 equipped Avantis? Well, good luck, because again, there were only 9 original cars, and it's very rare that one of them will even pop up for sale. And again, you Studebaker owners, man, you guys are some diehards. You guys never give up your cars, and I can really appreciate that. And so you can't see it, but I am tipping my hat to all of you. Before we jump to that drag race, let's talk about some of the awesome features that came with the Avanti. And to me, the crown jewel of the Avanti R2 is obviously the supercharger. Those things are just absolutely nasty. But beyond the supercharger, it's more about the engine as a whole. They were absolutely overbuilt and underrated. The R2 and the R1 came with forged connecting rods, a forged cam, a carter, 4-barrel carburetor, a heavy-duty water pump, and a high-performance dual-point distributor. But the Avanti wasn't only about performance, it was about safety, and this was at a time when nobody else was really thinking about that. It had a padded interior. It even had a built-in roll bar into the roof. On top of all of that, it was the first American car with front disc brakes. And that is absolutely awesome. And again, you guys, I am more than impressed with the Studebaker Avanti R2. But enough talk. Let's get to our featured drag race.
Pontiac Firebird 400, the left lane. This is going to be the Firebird 1374, 197 miles per hour.
Oh, yeah.
Pontiac Firebird, 1968, 400, 330 left lane, Jeff Bird has Studebaker Avanti. Wins with a 1412, 100 miles per hour. Dispatch.
Again, thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future drag race videos, and of course, I'll see you at the next one.